You're listening to Data Science Leaders, the premier podcast for executives tackling the world's most important challenges using the power of machine learning. Let's dive in. Hello and welcome to Season 2 of the Data Science Leaders podcast, the podcast for sharing the ideas and best practices of the world's most impactful data science leaders. In Season 2, we are sticking to that mission with a vengeance, but we are making one or two changes, and the biggest of those is, arguably, me. My name is Kjell Carlson, and I am your new host. I'm also the head of data science strategy and evangelism here at Domino Data Lab, and I was previously the industry analyst at Forrester covering data science, machine learning, and artificial intelligence for many years. And if you go back really, really far, you'll unearth that I'm one of those few strange people who did a PhD in strategy using data science methods over at the Harvard Business School. Today, however, we have a fascinating guest, someone who has interviewed more data science executives than perhaps anyone else in the world, someone who's had a front row seat to the profession, and someone who arguably has more insight onto what makes data science leaders tick than anybody else. And I am, of course, talking about Dave Cole, the host of Season 1 of the Data Science Leaders podcast for all of almost 50 episodes, who is now the head of customer success over at Retool, a low-code developer platform for building internal tools. Dave, I've been wanting to say this for a long time. Welcome to the Data Science Leaders podcast.
Thank you so much, Kjell. I'm glad to be here, and I'm very pleased to sort of pass the baton over to you. I'm looking forward to listening to Season 2.
Oh, thank you very much. Well, I wanted to kick off with just getting a sense of the beginning of all of this. It's like, what were you guys hoping to find out when you started the podcast? Why did you guys do this?
Yeah, I think that's, so I was a former data science leader myself. I mean, that's, I sort of have about 20 years of data and analytics experience, spanning data engineering, et cetera. And I eventually personally worked my way into a chief analytics officer role at Acxiom. And, I quickly sort of realized that I didn't actually know exactly how this data science thing was supposed to work. I had a team of data scientists, data engineers, it's engagement managers as well to work with the business. And I was sort of winging it, right? And doing the best that I could. And then I had an opportunity to join Domino and play a role working with data science leaders. And the most common question that I heard from them was just like, hey, am I sort of doing it right? And also I'd just love to talk to my peers. I'd love to talk to other data science leaders out there. And can you facilitate introductions, which I would, try to do. But what better way, to do it than in a forum like a podcast, right? In sort of a one-to-many type forum where you really could get the message out there and you could interview and have these discussions and have everyone learn all at once and sort of sharing their knowledge. And it was my way of sort of recognizing that there were more people like me out there who were curious and interested to see how the craft should be performed. And that was the genesis of it, and it was a lot of fun doing Season 1, and again, looking forward to now being a fan of Season 2.
Well, I was going to ask whether or not you found that experience of yours of being in that position of being a data science leader without really expecting to be a data science leader was actually pretty common amongst the people that you spoke with, that, they never expected to be leading teams of data scientists. They never expected to be managing organizations and being in the roles that they were.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know how many people set out their career saying like, "Oh, I'm going to be, leading a team one day." I think, probably a fair number do. I think instead they start with just a desire for whatever their interest is, right, and really wanting to become an expert. And I think that's where most, if not all, of the folks that I talked to started with. I mean, many of them had sort of PhDs in stats, and as that sort of, as I talked to folks who were more recently out of school. Now you can specialize in data science and take courses in data science in colleges now as well. But I also talked to a fair number of folks who, actually had more of maybe a business background, right? And over time had moved into sort of more data heavy roles, and then got more and more interested in the world of data science. And some took night courses as well to sort of learn machine learning, et cetera. And so I think it's that was always what was so interesting, is just the wide variety and sort of backgrounds of the folks that I spoke with.
I mean, data scientists come from a wide range of different backgrounds to begin with, let alone the folks who end up being data science leaders. But it sounds like there's almost like two tracks. There's the folks who set out with a data science training, applied statisticians, others who always thought they were going to be individual contributors and loved working with data, never really envisioned that they would be managing people. And then you have the other folks who were coming to this as leaders, managers, business users, who are much more comfortable with the role of managing teams, but were relatively new to the realms of analytics and data science. Were you finding those two separate tracks?
I was, and predominantly I would say you have a little bit more of the former than the latter, but I think one thing that I think is really important to point out to other DSLs, one thing I learned from talking to many of them is just how much they stressed and sort of got the importance of being tied very closely to the business. I think the name data scientist, right? The reason the scientist is in there is because in my opinion, there's a fair amount of experimentation, right? Instead of experimenting, with raw materials or what have you in a lab somewhere, instead you're experimenting with data and you're trying to glean insights from disparate data sources that might not be apparent to the naked eye. And I think that's what's kind of fun about it. But you have to be careful, right? That you're not just doing this in a vacuum. And you really need to make sure, that was one of the things I learned, is you really have to make sure that, you're driving measurable business outcomes and really moving the needle for your business counterparts. So I think that's why you do see some folks from the business side who have that data acumen and can be incredibly successful, by the way, at sort of implementing and taking these models and making sure that they're driving that bottom line value for for their company.
Absolutely. I mean, it's almost like there's experimentation on experimentation. There's the experimentation inherent in being a data scientist, which is, what makes being a data scientist so exciting in the first place is that you don't know what you find, you don't know what methods you're going to use, you don't know what data you're going to be able to use, and you don't know whether the result's going to be valuable or not. But then there's that other degree of experimentation at the business level of, it's like, okay, well, how are we going to actually make this usable for the organization? How are we going to embed this in our processes? How are we going to do the change management necessary to get this thing into production and then get adoption around it as well? So I guess there are different types of experimentation. There's experimentation at the level of the data science, and then there's experimentation at the level of the business change management, process engineering that goes into it.
And my focus was probably on the business itself, like the craft itself. There were obviously times that we would go into some of the algorithms and some of the techniques. We talked about deep learning with Eitan from Build.com, which was sort of very interesting. But I was more interested in those aspiring leaders and the existing leaders who really wanted to better understand how teams should be organized, how they should be measured. What makes a successful data science leader. Better ways to partner with the business. What percent of the time, and should they be experimenting? Should be a separate team that experiments. All of that sort of makes up and that you need to think about as a data science leader to be successful in your career. So that's where I tended to spend a bit more of my time.
I mean, arguably, that's where the valuable questions are right now in terms of where can people go for advice in terms of which method they should be using. There are tons of sources around that. There are more people who are trained on data science methods than there have ever been. But in terms of identifying individuals who have that, our leadership experience for going in and turning that into something valuable for the organization and then growing that from like one-off individual successful projects into like a scalable capability for the organization that's going to, transform the way the organization works and drive meaningful competitive advantage and things like that. That problem feels like it's one where we're getting a handle on it more, but it's it's not being solved by a long shot. Unless, are you seeing that even there, it's becoming more mature. There's more of a playbook emerging in terms of what business transformation, quote unquote, would look like using data science.
Yeah, I think, obviously, 5, 6, 7 years ago, data science was relatively nascent. I still think we're very much in the early innings here of data science and sort of honing our craft. But I do think that what has been interesting when talking to the various leaders is just that as sort of time went on, as I talked to more and more, I think the answer of whether or not like the business sort of valued and understood data science, it seemed more and more like I was getting lots of head nods, like, oh yeah, they're seeing a lot of the value. So it was less like proof of existence of why a data science team should be, and more around how can you really underscore the value and show that you're providing more value, say this quarter than the previous quarter, and so on. And like I was saying before, so many of them would just answer to having regular touch points with their customers. I mean, some even folks that I talk to even want to be measured by either the cost savings or the net the additional sort of revenue that they're driving. So again, that measurement element is so important. But yeah, like I think it's a lot of fun. I mean, there's a lot going on in the industry in this regard, and even now, even with some relatively challenging economic times, if you look at sort of the top 10 highest growth sort of roles, data scientist is still in that top 10. I took a peek at both the 2021 and 2022, and it's still up there. So it's still very much a hot commodity.
Well, I mean, to a certain extent, there's the question about, well, where else would a company look today in order to drive meaningful changes in how they operate? I mean, you've arguably for years and years it was about outsourcing, and we've taken that as far as we can go, and we've seen what then happens and how brittle that can be when you have something like a global pandemic coming along. So, I mean, in terms of, well, where else would an organization turn to materially affect how it does business differently? Arguably, is there anything else which is not competing with data science for, oh yeah, we're not going to do data science, we're going to take this other approach to go in and meaningfully outperform our competitors?
Yeah, I think there was. Yeah, I mean, there have been. I'm a little long in the tooth here in my career. You go back many years, and there was a lot of stock that was always placed in somebody with a lot of experience. With a lot of experience comes intuition. I think obviously that's still very true. You can cut through and find clear next steps so much more quickly sometimes with somebody who just has been there, done that. However, today, and like I think the big sort of sea change that I've seen happen over the last say decade is that data-driven decision making, right? And really making sure that you understand like what are the leading indicators that drive those lagging outcomes, the higher revenue, lower cost, et cetera. And you really need a data science team, a team that to help drive that. But you also need sort of a high degree of data literacy to be able to interpret what your data team is saying. And you need business leaders who are comfortable, asking questions around, what the data is sort of telling you. And I think that's the big thing that it really raises the bar in terms of how decisions are made and how they, should, and frankly, it's how all decisions should be made, right? It shouldn't be finger in the wind and, well, this is what I did at my last company. It should really be based on what you're seeing in the data.
Well, I guess I've always been of the opinion that arguably data science is more important during times of change than it is during times of stability. Because on the one hand, yes, you can say, well, but our models are out of date and they're no longer performing as they should. But it's one of those but you can tell when your models are misperforming. It's much harder to tell when your intuition is underperforming. And you can go in and you can retrain models and you can redeploy models. Have you ever tried to retrain intuition and redeploy a different sense of intuition? It's like that's not gonna work out so well. But I guess were you starting to hear that folks were like, well, actually, we need data science in order to be able to adapt to these changing conditions faster, or was it still in the pandemics hit us and our models are all not performing like they should?
I remember I was talking to a DSL at DocuSign. And he was mentioning sort of the importance of having the data science team be a part of the strategic sort of conversations. In their case, sort of the product strategy. And I felt that to be really forward thinking, right? Typically the way most companies operate, right, is you have heads of product, heads of engineering, heads of sales, heads of customer success, et cetera, making decisions, strategic decisions. And, they would typically meet with a data science team sort of and sort of come armed with the data that and the metrics, et cetera, that they're using. But it's fairly rare to actually have your head of data or your chief data scientist actually in the room, right? Providing their recommendations based on what they're seeing. And I think that, that to me is, even if you're a DSL today, I think that is something that you should sort of aspire to be. I mean, it's great being a supporting function to all these various roles and being involved, but in that role where you're supporting so many different areas of the business, like you have amazing intuition that is data driven, right? That you can be bringing to these conversations and sort of checking on when people sort of are varying into more of the finger in the wind and less, based on sort of solid evidence.
Well, it feels like there are two ways in which that data science leader is adding value there. I mean, one of them is in terms of more of the traditional role of the data scientist of providing insight, an ad hoc insight. So it's this is what my analysis of the data suggests that we should be doing. But it sounds like one of the things that DocuSign was doing was also saying, okay, but let's think about our product and let's think about all the way in which we can augment the capabilities of our product by going in and infusing new data or machine learning based capabilities into that product. And so the data scientist is there not in both the capacity of being able to say, okay, I think we need to go in and reallocate our funding from this to that, or we should be going after this market versus that one. But it also sounds like the data science leader is there also going in and saying, well, actually, there's a whole host of new capabilities that we could be adding that differentiate our product relative to our competitors. And we need to be taking that into account in our product strategy. And you need to be, the only way that you're going to know what's doable is once you start engaging the data science team to go and explore in this. Because you might want to build all of these things and some of them aren't going to be doable. And probably they're things that are doable that we hadn't even thought about, but we're only going to start figuring that out once we have a collaboration between the data science and engineering teams. But curious, was that what you had in mind? Sort of those two wells?
Well,
or
yeah.
one or the
So
other?
I think the start of my career, it was data science and analytics were very much focused on delivering those insights. Those insights would then allow you to make smarter and more intelligent sort of business decisions. I think where we've come, which is a very healthy sort of progression, is now we have data scientists actually sort of as they productionize their models are thinking about how those models can be embedded as features into the core product that may be customer facing and so I think I remember I was talking to the DSL from Overstock, Nishan, and he was mentioning that the product team themselves, they had sort of pods, had data scientists within those pods that would not only be helpful in I think the craft of the whatever feature that they were creating and seeing what insights they could bring, but actually building sort of net new features. And we talked a lot about search and how he was on the search team and it was more than just like, hey, are the results sort of they match what you searched on, but it was going a step further and saying, well, it might what you search on. You may not use the exact right words. It's what is more important is what you eventually end up sort of, identifying as, clicking on, right? And which might look very different from the words that you typed in. Like, what was your true intent? Like, what were you really trying to get at? I think that's what takes, that takes a real, data scientist being close to a problem like that, and actually, infusing that into the core product. That's where I think data science shines, and that's what's really exciting about how the field has sort of progressed and moved from this sort of back office, batch mode to more of a real time sort of supporting role within the product itself.
Yeah. Much easier said than done, though.
Yeah.
I remember as an industry analyst that so many of my conversations with data scientists on the practitioner side and on the manager side of things were almost like therapy sessions. It was this litany of problems that folks were running into, whether it is that folks weren't understanding what it was that they were doing, that folks where they weren't getting the support from IT teams, they were borrowing and pleading in terms of data and infrastructure, and then they do incredible work, and then it wouldn't get adopted by the end stakeholders. So I guess I'm curious throughout these conversations. I mean, were there any silver bullets that sort of emerged as to it's like, okay, this is a way that you can shortcut this, or was it no, it's trench warfare. You're going to have to work on this, and it's going to be a long process, and of working with those stakeholders and building up almost full stack data scientists who are also great communicators and consultants and all the rest of it.
So no silver bullet probably come as no surprise to anyone. I think as the data science teams have matured, what I've seen is just more a variety of titles. Some of which sort of new roles and more focused roles that come to sort of address some of the challenges that you're putting your finger on. For example, when it comes to ensuring that models are delivering on their promise and that they're not decaying, et cetera. You have machine learning engineers that are regularly monitoring these models and making sure that they get retrained on the right cadence, and that takes a little bit more of the operational burden off of your traditional data scientists. I think so. The data science community obviously is reacting to some of the challenges that you have, and realizing that you might be able to build a model in on your own on your laptop, but then productionizing it and sending it out to millions of users is a whole other ball of wax, right? That takes a whole other potentially skill to take your model and embed it into some other process or some other sort of product. So, and then when it comes to sort of expectation management, right, and working with your peers, I think the silver bullet in a way is something we've already sort of touched on, which is just making sure that your mission as a team and what you're working on each quarter or each month is really aligned with your company goals. And it could be. You could be in a COE type model, or hub and spoke type model. You could be in an embedded model. But regardless, like my advice would be the same, which is like really make sure that what you're working on is closely aligned. You will get if you do that, in my opinion, you'll have a laundry list of sort of projects that will be coming your way. And that's sort of the lifeblood of a data science team is working on fun and interesting and challenging problems.
I mean, it sounds like you're pointing to the sales element of being a data science leader.
Yes.
There's a always be closing element of making sure that you are going in and getting those projects. But it sounds like there's also is it a marketing element of this where it's also being able to message out just the what value your team is delivering, and that unless you have those as key elements of what you're doing, you can do the best work in the world, but it's not going to be sustaining. It's not going to be sustaining because it's not going to get adopted, but it's also not going to be sustaining because you're not going to get the additional investment to continue to grow and deploy additional projects and models.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, you mentioned the marketing element of it. I mean, certainly, you have your immediate sort of business counterparts who are coming to you with some of their problems and challenges. Obviously, you need to keep them abreast of the project status and what you're working on, and also you need to educate them on the iterative nature of data science, and the fact that like building a model is not a one and done thing, right? It is a living, breathing thing that needs to be monitored and needs to be kept up to date as features change, as the behavior of your users change, as new features get rolled out, et cetera, et cetera. But I also think that I think a great data science leader if you want to call it marketing, should also be, helping to provide some insights to the wider business, and just sort of on a regular cadence. I think that's always, very helpful. Every company has dashboards. Every company has all that. I think going a level deeper and in just, helping uncover some of those nuggets that may spawn a product idea, or that may spawn like an interesting discussion, at the executive level or the board level. I think that also, should be part of your purview as a DSL too. That's a great way also to get your name out, and get, folks from all corners of your company coming to you and saying, "Hey, I had this one question. Can you help answer that for me?"
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, some of these things are, you could say, aren't unique to data science. So arguably, so many things have a people, process, and technology aspect to it. A lot of the leadership challenges that we've been talking about are similar leadership challenges if you were over on the within the marketing department, or if you were in IT. But it's, so I guess I'm curious your thoughts on the way in which data science is similar or different. Certainly the iterative nature of this, and certainly the unknowns that go into this, because it's a new and maturing field, are different. Mm-hmm. But any other either differences or similarities that struck you?
Yeah, I mean, in a way, like I was going to say, data science is different because there's this experimentation element. Like I talked to a number of DSLs about like how much time would you carve out? It's around the 20-25% sort of range to sort of allow your data science team to experiment with new algorithms, new frameworks, building out even some of the infrastructure, like, should we have a feature store, or what benefits would that provide? Things like that. So but then again, like if you're in IT, you're playing around with new software. If you're in marketing, you're trying out, different marketing campaigns, different channels. So, that experimentation, I suppose one could argue, exists in a number of ways. I think what makes data science a little bit different in that regard is that a lot of times, like, you're writing the code and, yourself, you're not sort of taking off the shelf. Sometimes you're taking off the shelf tools, sometimes you're not. But there's a little bit more craftsmanship, to it, and a bit more. And what comes along with that is, really sort of the sky's the limit, right? I mean, there's only so many channels out there that you can tap into, and from a marketing perspective. But when it comes to data science, like, there's different data sources, there's third-party data sources that you can integrate into your models. There's, different algorithms. There's all sorts of, creative ways, so I think that element of creativity sometimes gets lost on the masses, when they sort of equate a data scientist to maybe just, more of a sort of a software engineer.
Well, I guess it's probably also one of the easiest thing to do to kill that kind of creativity by either making your data scientists become data engineers and spend all their time on the data engineering side, yes, or vice versa. You get them successfully to create one project, and then they spend the rest of their time at the company going and iteratively improving that one project that they've been working on.
Yep.
So it's the statement about it being the sexiest job of the 21st century. It's amazing how many disillusioned and unhappy data scientists you see because of the way, arguably self-inflicted, right? The way that we've constructed the roles, and the way that we either do or don't support them in terms of actually being able to achieve things.
100%. And I think data scientists most of them are sort of happiest, when they're in that experimentation phase and they're in that building phase, right? That's, when they're trying new things, that's when they're learning, that's when they're happiest. When they're, doing, taking a bunch of disparate data sources, munging the data and trying to get it into the right place, which, we've all heard the 80% of the time data scientists is spent working with the data itself, and 20% of the time they're actually, running their model, training their models, et cetera, and building their models. And wouldn't we love to sort of flip that around? I think it's just really hard, right? And I think it's hard to imagine a world where it is truly flips. I mean, I think that's kind of the, what the feature store is trying to get at. But you also need to really understand the data to be an incredibly good data scientist. And I talked to a number of data science leaders who really underscored that, which is, Yes, it'd be great for a data scientist to be modeling all the time, but they do need to stay very close to the data, understand how that data, where that data came from. So I think that I would be cautious at just like trying to, create roles to completely extract a data scientist and just have them, building models all day long. Because I think there might be some unintended, consequences with that. But yes, there are many times when we are far from that situation, and there's a lot more data engineering going on, or a lot more machine ML engineering going on, where they're having to babysit models that are in production, and only they are the ones who know how to make changes to it. And that's when you're setting yourself up for a lot of that drudgery.
Yeah, and I think some of this is the maturity of companies when it comes to their data platforms. I think I was delighted. The very last survey that I did over at Forrester was the first time when I was asking folks about different challenges across the data science lifecycle. It was the first time that folks did not say that accessing and cleaning the data was their single biggest challenge. So the great news was that they had graduated. It was their biggest problem was no longer being able to access and work with the data. Instead, they were running headlong into the next challenge, which was actually training the model and deploying it. But it's a wonderful sign of progression that we're finally getting to that.
Right.
But curious your thoughts on the degree to which division of labor helps with the challenges that we're talking about. So to the extreme, I've now started seeing teams where you've got a data science product manager who's somebody who is holding that business relationship and arguably is enough of a data analyst to go in and understand the data and build a lot of subject matter expertise. But then, coordinating and working with a data engineer, a data scientist, and an ML engineer and often a developer to go in and create an end user front end or adapt an end user front end to be able to surface those insights from a model to somebody. Now, that sounds wonderful that you could overcome this problem by just having those separate roles and have those roles work seamlessly together. But I guess I'm curious whether or not some folks are saying, yeah, but unless that data scientist also really understands that data, you can't really split them out that effectively.
Yeah, I think one DSL I spoke with, John Thompson, who's written a number of books, encouraged the audience to go out and read them. That's all about the craft of being a data science leader. I think he puts it best where he talks about the difference between sort of the factory model of data science and then also more of the sort of artisanal sort of approach. So, the artisanal approach is where you have true sort of data science sort of craftsmen who really can do it all, who can do a lot of the data engineering, who are very close to the business problems and can speak directly to the business, and then also can help deploy that model into production. And those are folks who've probably been around a while and played different roles and bring multiple skills to the table. But in his words, like he felt like they often delivered the best results. Versus maybe more the factory model, where you'd imagine it would be more, tuned, or you'd see it more frequently with larger companies that just have mountains of sort of problems and data problems that need to be tackled, and that's really where sort of speed to market, if you will, that speed with which you can get through the data science lifecycle, where having multiple roles can be really beneficial. Having in my world, it was an engagement manager. Now, you can call it a product manager for data science, who really is singularly owns the business relationship. And then you have the data engineer and the machine learning engineer. And now you also have analytics engineer. All of them create this pod, right? And they engage at the right moment throughout the data science lifecycle. And with the goal of sort of achieving that speed to market and that volume, right, of projects. So I think I think both obviously can work and both have their benefits. I think you got to figure out which one is sort of right for you and your organization based on the needs that you're seeing.
Well, I was going to ask whether or not, arguably, ideally you have both, and you have both models coexisting simultaneously in the organization, or it's one where it's a maturity story. So maybe you're starting out with it. It's going to, by nature of the small teams, it's going to have to be more on that artisanal model. But as you start getting scale, you start moving towards more of a factory model. But then preserving the artisanal in some sort of research lab or some innovation unit, which is continuing to push forward there.
Yeah, that's right. I think by and large that makes a lot of sense to me. I do think that one way that large companies can sort of keep a little bit more of that artisanal model is to embed some of the data scientists and even the even engineers and product folks within business units that are sort of verticalized and focused on various parts of the business. So if you're a company that has multiple products, instead of having a centralized team, you would have maybe a smaller sort of subset of folks who are with the idea that they're so close to the business that they don't need to have that product manager say, or don't need to maybe have maybe you do have a data engineer, but they're focused very much on just the data that vertical sort of cares about. You may still have a centralized team, right? In sort of a COE model, but that might be one way, I think, where you could maybe hold on to that artisanal model. But yeah, I think by and large, as data science teams mature, you do see more of that factory model as sort of time goes on.
Well, I mean, one potential implication of what you're saying there is that yes, you can rely on your data science center of excellence, but arguably each part of the business should also be building up its own capabilities, and any line manager should also be aware of data science and understand how it should be used, and be proactively coming up with those use cases and either working with the COE in order to bring them in, or sometimes hiring their own and working with embedded data scientists. So it's almost, I might be overreading into this, but there's this element of where, at the end of the day, everybody needs to become a data science leader at some. If you're touching data, and everybody is touching data increasingly in all of their different roles, you can't really not be paying attention to the space. You do need to go in and understand, so what is this strange thing called data science, and how could I use it? Not from a data scientist point of view. I don't need to go and learn when I should be using random forest models versus logistic regression models, and so on. But learning it from the point of view of, well, what is realistic and what's not realistic in terms of what I could actually do with this, and what would a data science project actually look like, and how can I ensure that it would be run successfully?
Yeah, I think, yes, I think that being sort of data science literate should be sort of bare bones requirement. Just like I think most people understand the basics of accounting, things like that. Like I think it's that sort of level of importance, and even more so, especially as again, companies really lean on being sort of data-driven decision makers. So I very much agree with that sort of mindset. I also think, as you going back to the model, that it's great to sort of embed these data science teams into the various verticals. I think that's certainly an approach. But I do think that there's having some sort of center of excellence or a team that is focused on building out and owning essentially the platform that maybe many of your data scientists can be built should be working from is really important. Like I've seen, and I'm sure you have too, many companies that will just basically have separate IT departments essentially within each of these business units. And there's some real, there's some obvious economies of scale, and there's some obvious collaboration opportunities that you're missing out when you don't find a way to sort of standardize and get data scientists talking. They love to talk shop and talk about what they're working on. And if they find someone else who's working on a similar problem, they would like nothing more, in my experience, than jumping on a whiteboard and going deep on a particular problem or challenge. And that would be my fear, right? Of that more verticalized model. Like, I think you're right. Like, you want to have that mix, right? For sure.
Absolutely. Well, I was just still excited that you were hinting that, in effect, if everybody needs to go in and understand a little bit about leading data science, then really everybody needs to listen to the Data Science Leaders podcast, where we're providing those kind of insights.
Yes, your TAM, your total addressable market, is really planet Earth, Shell. So yes, I expect to see the volume of your subscribers just go off the charts here.
Excellent, excellent. But I guess with that, thoughts on the unexplored areas. Where should we be taking this podcast? What are those areas that you see as being the most interesting, exciting for folks right now?
Yeah, I think certainly Chat GPT is just off the charts, and there's some really interesting things that are going on there. I mean, how far are we away from just saying like, hey, I would like for you to build a model that does X, Y, and Z, and then away you go, right? And it just writes all the code for you. So who knows if that? So I think yes, I think focusing on like the trends and focusing on where data science might be 2-3 years from now might be really exciting. I was really interested in people's stories, right? Hearing about how they became data scientists. I think those will still be interesting as you talk to your data science leader guests. Just hearing the disparate background that they all have. I would have loved to have had more, sort of real-time stories and things that they're working on. Obviously, given the nature of their work and the fact that they're working for companies, they couldn't share all those details. But however, all of them, I think, have interesting stories throughout their career that they can sort of hang their hat on. So adding that into the podcast will be a lot of fun. But I think there's just a lot going on. I mean, 5 years ago, if you would have talked about AI, people would have been like, half the audience, half the room or less would have known what you're talking about. Now it's hard to not know what AI is all about and machine learning. So these are exciting times indeed.
Oh, indeed. Well, I guess I was going to ask you whether or not your outlook for the future of data science has changed after having done this podcast, or is this one where have we sort of figured this out and the future's pretty clear, or is this one where we're just getting started and could go in all sorts of different directions?
I think we're starting to figure it out for sure. I think we're just getting. I think we still are just getting started, and I know that's that's no matter what, it's almost people always want to. But I really truly do. Believe this. I think the applications of models and AI, we're really just starting to scratch the surface, and that's what makes it so exciting is that in the end, my hope is that data science, thanks to models, like there's a lot more efficiencies out there, and everyone's quality of life is sort of improved. Data science can take away a lot of the mundane tasks. I wanted to stop short of, my two sons, using ChatGPT to do their homework for them. I mean, that's a bridge too far. But that's also now a distinct possibility, right? And so I do think that we also, as the data science leaders, need to wield our power sort of intelligently and for the greater good, and always make sure that we're doing the right things. And we talked a lot about bias and everything else on the Data Science Leaders podcast, and I imagine that will not go away, and those challenges will continue to appear, and we will continue to need to stay close to them, so that data science and models don't get a bad name. We want them to be doing good for this world. So I hope that stays true, and I'm very excited that my DSL brethren out there will carry that torch.
Well, Dave, thank you very much for joining us on the Data Science Leaders podcast. But above all, thank you very much for all of the work that you've put into creating the Data Science Leaders podcast. I hope this isn't goodbye, and that you will be checking in on us from time to time.
Absolutely.
But again, thank you very much. If folks want to reach out to you on LinkedIn, social media, is that okay?
Of course. And many of you have, and I welcome and encourage it. And I love to have chats with all of you about this. So thanks so much for having me. It was a pleasure. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Dave, thank you very much, and may all your future endeavors be as successful as this one.
Thank you, Shell. Take care.
You've been listening to Data Science Leaders from Domino Data Lab. If you found our discussion insightful, be sure to subscribe to never miss an episode. Your support helps us deliver cutting-edge content and keep the data science community informed and inspired. We appreciate every review. Until next time.